Jad and I decided to spend our honeymoon in America, in the vibrant United States of America. I originally wanted to go to the West Indies, maybe Martinique, but Jad chose the USA, and as usual, she won the argument. Surprisingly, I didn't regret it at all. We were on a British Airways flight from Heathrow to Kennedy Airport, and despite unsuccessfully trying to join the Mile High Club during the flight, we quickly caught up by exploring the East Coast, visiting New England and other cities. Originally from Huntington and Cambridge, located a stone's throw from Cambridge University, we enjoyed studying Yale and Harvard during our visit. The real shock was how beautiful and rural New York State turned out to be, not at all what we imagined it to be. By the end of our 3-week trip, Jad and I had definitely checked into more motels than the average American in his entire life. Despite this, we cherished every moment and promised each other on the way home that we would return sooner rather than later. It was a wonderful plan, a brilliant idea. Despite our best intentions, the demands of real life and our careers got in the way of our plans. 9 years have passed, and here we are, Dave Martin and Jad, a couple in their late 20s, happily married without children, living in a beautiful house that was heavily mortgaged like most others in our situation at the time. Despite the financial burden, we enjoyed life to the maximum. I was recently promoted to assistant director at Alkins Limited, a company that specialized in modern incinerators. In our niche industry, we have held leading positions around the world. Although we were a small company, we were constantly expanding and growing. Working under my boss, George, who essentially ran the company, I ended up in 4th or 5th place in the hierarchy. Jad, a school teacher, also worked well, but her promotion was slower because of her work experience, not just because of her abilities. Sometimes she looked upset that I was ahead of her in her career growth. Looking back, I wonder if this jealousy played a role in her actions. Despite the fact that we did not experience such passion as the first time we got married, I can say with confidence that we still loved each other. Therefore, we decided to make a spontaneous trip to a cozy hotel with breakfast outside the city. The change of scenery had a wonderful effect on our relationship, and we began to communicate again in a way we hadn't communicated for several months. We could have expected that our personal life would improve during the vacation, but we could not imagine how passionate and intense our moments together would be. The spark ignited with renewed vigor, and we returned home feeling more in love than ever before. The next day, we were supposed to go on a much-needed vacation to the sunny beaches of Spain. Jad convinced me to go shopping for new holiday outfits for both of us, but as expected, I ended up buying only shorts. But Jad managed to pick up 4 or 5 new outfits, each of which was more daring than the previous one. But it was the last outfit that she tried on that caused her real delight. Jad has always been more adventurous and daring on vacation, often taking part in events and wearing clothes that she would not normally consider at home. I think this day was no exception. I was wondering if Jad would make the decision on her own or come out and put it on to get my opinion. I had a feeling that she had chosen a revealing bra that morning, so if she came out, it would amuse a few guys. To my surprise, she confidently entered the waiting area, not at all embarrassed. But I was wrong about the bra. It looks like she put on a modest bra in the morning but took it off to try on a blouse, so in the end, it didn't matter. I watched as Jad circled around us, exposing her new black blouse to the men around her, including my own. She definitely attracted attention, but in a more explicit way than I was comfortable with. The fabric was fragile and barely covered her form. It's hard to find the right words to describe it. She didn't protect her modesty and didn't cover her breasts completely. Could my friends and I clearly see the shape of her breasts? Definitely. Oh my God, my wife Jad was flaunting her breasts to all the guys like she was topless. The thin fabric of her blouse barely concealed what was underneath, and every detail was clearly visible. It wouldn't be so provocative if she was completely naked from the waist up, and she was enjoying herself. I can't say that it bothered me much, but she, the cheeky one, reveled in it. Jad bought the blouse, and we went to the next store. We found a new bikini there. She disappeared into the fitting room, taking her time. Finally, she pulled back the curtain and stood in front of me, waiting for my admiration. My heart was racing as I looked at her, knowing that several guys waiting nearby were also sneaking glances at her. Jad, a stunning young woman with a slender figure of 6 feet 3 inches, completely captured my attention. "Where's the top of the swimsuit?" I managed to ask when I regained the ability to speak. "We're going to Spain," Jad exclaimed with delight. "Who needs a bikini top anyway?" It was true, just like last time a year before when we visited the same place, and after a couple of hours, my wife decided to go topless like many other women. She didn't wear a bikini for the rest of our stay there. But a department store in Cambridge is far from a beach in Spain. "Do you like it?" "What do you think?" she asked, arching her back slightly to emphasize how beautiful her body was. Before I could respond, Jad had already attracted the attention of two fans who were watching her every move. She smiled playfully and moved over to get a better look at them. "Can I have it?" she asked, making me feel a mixture of embarrassment and excitement at her boldness. One of the guys cheekily offered to give her one, which caused the rest of the group to laugh. As we drove home, I recalled the events of that evening. Jad's behavior was out of character for her, which indicated that something was wrong. My wife was a strong-willed woman who always felt the need to take revenge when she was wronged. For several months, she openly flirted with a colleague, which led to a public kiss on the dance floor, after which I felt insulted. I couldn't help but wonder where his hands had gone. At that moment, our fight after that was explosive. Jad shifted the blame onto me without showing the slightest remorse for her actions. It seems that I completely forgot about the anniversary of our first date, which was just a few days before it. It seems that she was offended by my oversight, and she decided to make me pay for it. I couldn't even remember the last time we celebrated this event. And a month later, I came home late for our dinner. It was only a half-hour delay as I was stuck in traffic returning from a meeting with a client in the north of the country. Long hours on the road, combined with an accident on the freeway, led to a significant delay in my return home. I tried to call her in advance and warn her that I would be late, but it was useless. When I finally got home, she had already left and left a note saying that she had canceled our dinner plans. I had no idea where she had gone, but I promised to call later and meet her later. Turned out to be more than 3 hours later, and it wasn't so much an invitation as a demand that I pick her up and take her home. I expressed my disappointment and said that she would find her way back on her own. She left alone, so she can come back on her own. There were a lot of guys ready to take me home, Dave. I just don't know how I can repay them for their kindness, she said. Those were exactly her words. When I arrived at the club, I was furious. My anger only intensified when I saw Jad surrounded by a group of young men, most of whom were 5 years younger than her, clearly hoping for something more. At the end of the night, her revealing dress did not stop them from thinking that they had made the right choice. "I'm sorry, guys," I said carefully, making my way through the crowd to her and gently pushing away their wandering hands. "It's time for this lady to go home." "Get off me, buddy," one of them snapped, trying to push me aside. "We met her first." "Find yourself another beauty," another chimed in. "It's okay, guys. My husband came to take me home." "I'm sorry to interrupt the evening, but I have to leave with him," Jad said. The situation quickly escalated, and it turned out that I was in a complete minority compared to the angry company. It looks like they decided that Jad had cheated on them, and now I'm preventing them from having a good time. Two of them, including the aggressive one, started physically pushing me. I hadn't been in a fight in years, since high school, but I'm not one to back down easily, so I fought back. The tension continued to build until Jad intervened. "Stop it, guys," she shouted, urging them to stop. "Leave him alone, okay?" Her words had an effect, but the tension in the air remained palpable. "Come on," Jad continued, almost enjoying the confrontation. "I'll kiss you all, and then my husband and I will go home." Her attempt to defuse the situation only fueled my anger. "You're not going to kiss any of them, Jad," I shouted, unable to contain my irritation. "And don't you dare come home today." The confrontation intensified, forcing outsiders to diligently distance themselves from the escalating conflict. The bartender started collecting empty glasses from our table, forcing most of the young people in the group to step back and move away. But the two troublemakers were just as excited as I was. It was clear that trouble was brewing, and I found myself in the middle of it. Suddenly, two guys appeared and started to separate us. I couldn't deny that I felt relieved, even though I was full of adrenaline and ready to fight. "Stay in your seats," one of the bouncers ordered a group of young men, pushing them back before addressing us. "I recommend that you leave, friend, and before the situation escalates even more," he advised me, "and take this troubled woman with you. There are times when it is necessary to protect a spouse from insults, and there are times when prudence is preferable to valor." I chose the latter option and took Jod with me. At that moment, I agreed with his words. The car ride home was held in intense silence, and upon arrival home, we again got into a heated argument. We hardly spoke to each other for the next 3 days, and I made it clear to her that if she repeated her act again, the consequences would be serious. So, back to the events in the locker room and their catalyst. She just fired a warning shot in my direction. "I don't like that you're working tomorrow morning while we're on vacation, so consider this a warning," Jod said. "But in my opinion, as outlined in my book The Mad Cow, there is a significant difference between flaunting yourself to strangers and actively encouraging their courtship through flirting, as she did." I had only one appointment the next day. Butch was the epitome of authenticity, a man who radiated a sense of reality that was hard to find. He came all the way from America to see our products. My boss, George, had visited them a few weeks earlier, and now Butch paid a return visit to familiarize himself with our products. My task was to quickly guide him through our production process and then show him the production plan in action. After a short lunch, I said goodbye to him and went home to change my clothes and catch a late evening flight to the airport. Jod was furious when I told her about my plans and insisted that I cancel the meeting with Butch. After all, I tried to emphasize the importance of this meeting for our company and the potential growth it can bring, both for the company and for me personally. Despite my explanations, she was unhappy, which most likely was the reason for the quarrel that occurred the day before. "You put your job above me," she shouted when I resisted her demands. I decided not to remind her of the times when we had to cancel plans because of her school duties, confident that everything would be fine once we were on the plane. I knew Jod could be a bit narcissistic and stubborn, but I came to terms with it when I married her. I patted her on the back, kissed her on the cheek, and reminded her to be ready and packed when I got home. "And in a few hours. If you're late, you'll regret it," she warned. Jod responded with more fury than I thought was necessary and poured out her words at me. The meeting was a success, even better than I could have imagined. It was easy for me to find common ground with Butch, despite the fact that I only met him briefly during his last visit a few months ago. He asked thoughtful questions, and I answered them confidently. By the end of the meeting, it became clear that we would soon start fulfilling the order. When we were finishing work, Butch asked if we were going to have lunch. I recommended a nearby pub where we could have a quick snack and a beer, but he declined the offer. "Let's go somewhere in a more relaxed environment where we can discuss some things that I need to discuss with you," Butch suggested. I checked the time and saw that we had some more free time, so I agreed. An hour later, when we were only halfway through eating, he started bombarding me with questions that seemed endless. "How much did you want to know about our company, our product, and even about me?" I realized that I had to warn my wife that I might be late and went to the bathroom. I decided to wait another 10 minutes before reluctantly telling him why I needed to leave. It wasn't easy to turn down such an important client, but I still had a little time left. Jod shouted into the phone, not wanting to listen to my explanation. "I warned you, Dave. If you're late, you'll regret it. I'm not going to miss this vacation, even if I have to go there alone." I tried to calm her down, but my efforts were in vain as I hurried away. Our anger at each other only grew, and she refused to listen to what I had to say. I decided to go back to Butch and tell him about the situation, asking if he could find his way to his destination on his own. "This will save me time, and I will arrive at the house a few minutes later than planned. I'm married, Butch. You'll surely understand me well," I said when I returned to his desk. "It's time for me to be honest with you." "Oh my God, what's going on? How did he know? What's he going to tell me?" I thought, sitting and anxiously waiting for him to start talking. I was sure that he was going to cancel a large order, which I was so sure was safe. How did he know I was in a hurry? I must have ruined everything by rushing things. Why didn't I just mention my busy schedule at the beginning of our meeting? "Dave, I want you to join my team," he said confidently. "Would you like to move to the United States?" I was speechless, unable to lift my chin to meet his gaze. Can you repeat that? I asked, regaining my composure. I've been making inquiries about you, Dave. George didn't mention it, but we plan to get a license to produce your plants in the USA, and we need someone with your experience to help us get started, Butch explained. All I could say was a simple but, after which Butch continued. George recommended you, Dave, as the ideal candidate for this position. He wants to keep you, but this opportunity with Alkins could make a lot of money in the next 10 years. He thinks you're right for the job, Butch informed me. Is George sure about this? I asked. I talked to him personally, Dave. He knew everything, but he wanted to wait to see you to make sure you were exactly who he meant, Butch replied. I leaned back in my chair, overwhelmed with joy at the thought of living and working in America as a high-ranking executive. Jod will be absolutely thrilled when I tell her the news. Recalling the wonderful time we spent in this place, we both expressed a desire to return, but I never imagined that I would return under such circumstances. I was at a loss when he told me in detail about the incredible package of services they offered me. The benefits seemed endless. You need to catch a plane, young man, he said in conclusion. When you come back from vacation, you can discuss this with your wife. I will be happy to wait for your decision, he said. I'm ready to give my consent right now, I stuttered. I confidently agreed, confident that my wife would also agree. Getting up from our seats, we shook hands in agreement, and Butch quickly urged me to pick up my wife and board the plane. Plunging headlong into the clouds, I checked the time and realized that it would be very soon. When I got to the parking lot, I took out my phone and dialed my home number, hoping for the best. It rang as it should, but there was no answer. Looking at the time, I realized that it had been 2 minutes since I promised to be home. I walked over to the car and started the engine, dialing Jody's number. She answered almost immediately, her voice full of disappointment. "Where are you?" she shouted. "I'm going home, dear," I replied excitedly. "You won't believe what happened." But before I could continue, she interrupted me. "Go to hell, Dave. You don't care about me, do you?" I was speechless for a moment. "Of course, I do," I began, but she cut me off. "All you care about is your damn job, isn't it? And you don't give a damn about me." "I had to call Nick to give me a ride to the airport because I knew you wouldn't arrive on time," she said angrily. "Nick?" "Oh yes, this is Nick Jones, the art teacher she works with, an arrogant know-it-all who considers himself better than others." The fact that she exchanged kisses with him when we had disagreements didn't suit me. "Jody, please, I'm almost home," I begged. "I'm only 3 or 4 minutes later than I said," I pleaded, but she was already halfway to the airport. "It's so hard, Dave," she replied. "I'll go without you if you're not there." She ended the conversation before I could say anything else. I tried to call her back, but there was no response. Disappointed, I checked the time and realized that I still had enough time to get to the airport and check in for my flight. I turned the car around and drove towards the airport. As I expected, I had at least half an hour left. I found a parking spot and hurried inside. I took my parking ticket and hurried to the departure terminal, hoping that Jody hadn't forgotten to take my suitcase. Despite my attempts to find her, she was nowhere to be seen, and time was running out. In desperation, I went to the departure desk and asked about my wife. The pretty blonde behind the counter quickly found her on the list. "Yes, Mrs. Martin and Mr. Jones checked in about 15 minutes ago," she said. My heart sank. "What?" I scared the girl with my reaction, and I had to quickly apologize for my outburst. I insisted that there was a mistake, explaining that the tickets were booked in the name of Mr. Martin, not Mr. Jones. The girl realized that I was upset and looked again. After confirming the information, she explained that Mrs. Martin had copied one of the tickets in the name of Mr. Jones. I was shocked and muttered, "Is that possible?" The girl simply replied, "Yes." Feeling a pang of self-pity, I began to realize that something strange was happening. Despite the 40 pounds she paid without hesitation, I stood there like a lost soul, not knowing what to say or do. "He had his passport with him, Mr. Martin," she apologized, trying to calm me down. Everything looked legitimate, but I couldn't get rid of the feeling that something was wrong. I thanked her for her help, but as I walked away from the counter, I couldn't get rid of the feeling of anxiety. What is she up to? It was getting out of control. I looked at the departure board, trying to make sense of what was happening. It immediately became clear that the plane had not yet taken off and had not even started landing. I hurried to make my way to the boarding gate, but before reaching the departure hall, I was stopped at the counter. Entry was prohibited without a boarding pass. Despite my attempts to convince and argue my passage, it was clear that if I persisted, the guards would soon be called. Defeated, I made it to the bar and sat down, feeling completely depressed. In just 30 minutes, everything changed. I couldn't believe it. No, it couldn't be true. She was really going on vacation with that annoying Nick Jones, not with me. It just seemed impossible. I desperately hoped it was just a bad dream. But then, an unexpected idea came to my mind. It wasn't the best idea, but at that moment, it seemed like the only way out. I hurriedly headed to another part of the airport and finally reached the observation hall. Previously, it could have been an outdoor terrace, but now, for safety reasons, it was covered with large glass windows. And there, to my surprise, she was standing, watching. My wife, Jod, walked across the tarmac to her waiting plane. I couldn't help but notice her flowing blonde hair and toned figure. But what caught my attention even more was that Nick got off the bus after her and followed her to the plane. My blood boiled in my veins when he caught up with her and put his arm around her slender waist. I clearly saw how she bent down and kissed him on the cheek. The guards were just doing their job, and now I understand that. I realized that I acted irrationally, banging on the glass of the window and shouting, knowing that they could not hear me from such a distance. Jod didn't even turn around to look at me. In the end, they released me from custody without bringing any charges, considering that I no longer posed a threat to others. I returned to the car, feeling depressed and defeated, and decided to call Jod on her cell phone. It was all in vain, a waste of time. What a disaster, what a complete disaster. I may have shed a few tears that night, although it's hard to say for sure because I was too drunk when I got home from a local pub. I couldn't even get through to her in Spain because I didn't have her number and her phone wasn't working internationally. The next day, around noon, I finally woke up to the loud ringing of the phone next to me. I fell asleep on the couch, clutching my phone tightly. "Hello," I said softly into the phone, not knowing what to expect. My wife's familiar voice, stern and authoritative like a teacher, asked if I was John. "Yes," I replied simply, without hesitation. She accused me of not repenting of my actions. "What is it?" I replied. There was anger in her voice when she accused me of letting her down again. Embarrassed, I asked if I had really disappointed her. Despite my attempts to understand her feelings, she continued to scold me for the fact that her work was more important to me. "What about the time you missed dinner with our new neighbors because of stupid school problems?" I reminded her, realizing that this was a pointless argument. "I arrived at the airport on time," I said. "That's different, Dave," she shouted back. "There's nothing special about it for me. We were just yelling at each other, and there was no end in sight." So, I decided to try a different approach. Even when I woke up, I couldn't remember everything that had happened the day before I began. But I tried to explain Butch's proposal to her. I calmly continued. "I need to talk to you about my work." Jod interrupted me, her disappointment obvious. "Well, again, you're thinking about your job all the time. What about me?" "I am alone in Spain," she spoke, memories flooding back to me, and I felt my love for Jod waning. "Alone, Jody?" I asked. There was silence on the other end. Jod seemed surprised that I knew. "Well, not alone," I whispered. "Are you sleeping with him?" After waiting for a short pause in the conversation, she replied. "What if I am?" "It's your own fault," Jod replied venomously. "Did he satisfy you better than I ever could?" I asked angrily. "He's a lot better than you, so get over it, Mr. Nobody." The call ended abruptly, and she hung up, probably slamming it shut. If my marriage hadn't been over yet, this last remark might have been the final nail in the coffin. The next day, I found myself in George's office, where a new job was being discussed. He was surprised to see me on the spot, expecting me to be in Spain. I evaded his question as to why I hadn't mentioned it earlier. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "I couldn't," he explained, "until he saw you and decided you were the right person for the job." I was grateful for his trust, but I couldn't shake the feeling that my silence could have cost me my marriage. When I shared my problems with him, I was surprised by the lack of shock or surprise on his part. Finally, George plucked up the courage and told me, "Dave, you'll be the last to know." "What does that even mean?" Dave asked. George hesitated. "Nothing concrete, Dave," he said. "But at the last few events of Jody's company, well, let's just say she was acting out." Dave was stunned. "What do you mean, George?" Dave wondered aloud. George tried to lighten the mood. "Wait until you get to know her," he said with a smile, changing the subject. Distracted by other questions, I asked, "Who is she, George?" "She is the embodiment of every man's fantasy," the boss replied. "What do you mean?" I asked, feeling a little out of place. "She's your personal assistant," he said with a grin. "An Asian American. I met her a month ago when I was in town," he replied. I just stared at him, not knowing what to say. "Lucky guy," he said with a touch of envy. "You'll understand when you see her. Someone wins, someone loses." The next few days were a blur, partly because of the turmoil in my marriage. No matter how eager one person was to get me to work, the other was just as determined to get a license. It seemed to me that I had flown through the whole process. Then, Jod called again. I had a premonition that she would call, and I wasn't surprised when it happened in the middle of the morning. "I love Spain," she said, greeting me. "I just had to call and tell you how great it is here." I started to say something, but she interrupted me. "Never mind, honey. I have to tell you something," she said, interrupting me again. "Are you ready to apologize for your behavior, dear?" she asked, a question I tried to speak, ignoring Jody's rude remarks. "I have something important to say," I started. "I'm really sorry, honey." Jod interrupted, not making much effort to listen. "You are still very dear to me, and when you are ready to apologize, we can move on. In the meantime, I have another person I want to make happy," she chirped. I hung up without saying anything, not knowing if Jod would do the same. It looked like she was drunk, and not just drunk, but completely drunk. If she thought having an affair with an art teacher was more important than building a future with me, then that was her problem, not mine. The next week passed in a whirlwind of emotions, excitement, and sadness intertwined. What will all this lead to? Jody's unexpected call at an early hour caught me off guard. "Hi, Dave," she murmured. "I've been thinking. How did you know Nick was with me?" "I saw you getting on the plane together," I replied, trying to get rid of the fog of sleep. I was surprised that she called me at such a late hour and asked such a question. "You were there, Dave. Were you really there?" Jody's words made me angry. "Of course, I was there, Jody," I replied, blushing with anger. "How do you think I could have found out that this Jones was with you? Why didn't you intervene, Dave? Why didn't you do anything?" She began to speak, with tears in her eyes. "I didn't expect you to come, Dave. Nick gave me a ride to the airport, and in a fit of anger, I asked him to come with me. To be honest, I had no idea that you were there, honey," she said into the phone, with tears in her eyes. "Did your friend Nick happen to take his luggage and passport with him?" I replied. "Oh no, oh Dave," but I hung up before she could say anything else. After that, she tried to call me several more times, but I was too busy making preparations to answer. It took several days before I finally picked up the phone. "Hi, is that you, Dave?" Jody's voice rang out. "Yes, Jod, it's me," I replied. "What do you need?" Judy's voice sounded desperate as she explained, "Dave, I need you. Nick was a bastard, and I need you." I mumbled something unintelligible in response. Jod continued, "I went back to the room last night, and there was some girl with him." "Well, that's terrible," I said sarcastically, but Jod didn't catch it. "How could someone do something like this to me, Dave?" Jod asked, her voice full of resentment and confusion. "It's hard to believe," I replied, trying to suppress a grin. Betraying my trust in this way is simply unthinkable, she muttered, clearly slightly tipsy. How could he do that? People can be so unpredictable, I replied, trying to look sympathetic. Dave, I'm interrupting my trip. I can't stay here anymore. I'll be back tomorrow at 4 o'clock. Can you pick me up? I was about to refuse, but then it dawned on me that I could really do it. Of course. See you at 4 o'clock tomorrow, I said harshly. Did you hint at something when I called you that day? Jod asked. She took me by surprise. Maybe something about your job, nothing important, Jod, I replied. I don't want to burden you with the details of the job. In the end, you'll find out anyway. I was ready for her arrival by 2:30 and was slightly annoyed when her flight was delayed by 20 minutes. When she came out of the airport building, I stood like an obedient husband and even managed to smile. Hi, Dave, my love, how nice to see you, she exclaimed when she noticed me, dropped her bag, and hugged me tightly, biting into my lips with a passionate kiss. I must admit that she looked absolutely amazing. Jod has always been very tanned, and her blonde hair perfectly accentuated her. Let's go home, honey, Jod whispered in my ear. I've missed you so much, and I can't wait to catch up in bed. All thoughts of an apology seemed to have disappeared. She seemed to have forgiven me and loved me again. I suggested having coffee first. No, let's go home right away, his wife insisted. I insisted on stopping for a drink and took her to a nearby cafe. Did you have a good vacation, Jody? I asked, grabbing coffee for her and tea for myself. It all started well, she replied softly. I'm sorry if I went a little overboard, I teased her. So, Nick isn't as good in bed as you thought? Jod looked at me sadly, a tear rolling down her cheek. Not really, she said. She began to tell me about his betrayal, which she had to go through. Then I caught this bastard in bed with one of the maidservants in my bed, in my room, she exclaimed. I couldn't help but step in, pointing out that they shared a room, and technically, it was our bed and our room, considering that I paid for everything else. Can you imagine, Dave? She continued. We were supposed to spend a vacation together, and he left and slept with another woman, leaving me alone. I expressed my sympathy to her, realizing how much pain she must be feeling because I had already been through a similar situation. Forget about him. He'll get what he deserves. Can we go home, Dave? I really need to make it up to you, she said. I tried to explain that I had tried to share my news with her more than once, but she kept cutting me off. It can wait, Dave, she interrupted again. Let's just go home, and you can tell me on the way. I didn't hesitate. Here are the car keys, Jody, I said, arriving in her old car since my company car had been returned to All Skins the day before. Here are the keys to the house. Now it belongs to you, just you, Jod, not us, I clarified for her. Ownership has been transferred to your name, and all bills have been paid by the end of the month. If you suddenly decide to sell the house, the proceeds should be enough for another couple of weeks in Spain. Oh, and I noticed that one of your tires was worn out, and there was a strange noise coming from the gearbox, I added. Jod stared at me, still processing the information she had received. Jody's expression remained blank as I continued to explain. I wanted to say, Jod, that I was offered an amazing job in America. There's a great salary, great benefits, everything I've ever dreamed of. A huge smile spread across Jody's face as she took in the news. I felt a little sad. When are we leaving? She asked eagerly, completely forgetting about our previous conversation. Actually, I'm leaving on a BA flight in 40 minutes, Jod, I informed her. Do you have a ticket for me too? She asked excitedly. No, I replied firmly. When can I follow you? Judy asked urgently. Never, Jod, I said bluntly. I'm sorry, but you're staying here. 10 minutes later, I walked into the departure lounge alone, leaving Jod behind, tears streaming down her face as she stood helplessly at the counter, unable to follow me any further. The last thing I saw was her tear-stained face as I left, realizing that I was parting with her forever. It was a strange feeling of déjà vu, only this time the roles were completely reversed. Just 10 days ago, I was standing at a table, unable to fly to another airport and go to my beloved. The pain in my heart was as intense as it was then. 9 years, 3 months, and 6 days had passed, and I found myself back at Heathrow, in the same terminal from which I left many years ago. It wasn't my first time back, but this time it was different. I stayed there for 2 weeks and planned to stay much longer to sign a licensing agreement with Butch's company in Huntington, USA. The company was a resounding success, and I became the CEO of Butch's division and a significant shareholder over time. Butch became a close friend of mine, and it was through him that George invited me to return to the UK and take up the post of managing director of All Skins, while George was preparing for retirement. The company experienced significant growth in my absence, largely due to cooperation with the American market, which allowed us to reach a wider audience with our products. Everything turned out as well as possible, especially for me, because I knew that in addition to the position, I would soon have a significant stake in the company. In the arrival area, I was looking forward to a former colleague from Butch's company, who was very supportive of me from the very beginning. Despite the fact that she no longer worked for the company, it was very nice that she would join me in the UK. Even before I saw her, I felt her presence, as every man in the crowd seemed to straighten up at the sight of her. Meen was just as stunning as the day we first met, if not more. Her smile lit up the entire terminal. As soon as she saw that I was waiting for her, turning to her 2 companions, she excitedly pointed at me, and they quickly headed towards the place where I was standing. "Dad! Dad! I've missed you so much," our daughter Maddie exclaimed, rushing into my arms. She looked a lot like her mother and had already left a trail of broken boyish hearts behind her when she moved to the UK. My 8-year-old son greeted me with a smile that spoke volumes, although perhaps a little less violently than usual. His height was impressive for his age, and I couldn't wait for him to move from American football to European football. Maybe one day he will play for Arsenal. "The first day of our new life," my beloved wife murmured, bending down to kiss me. Of course, I did not leave Judy's act unpunished. During her phone conversation while she was in Spain, I turned on the dictaphone and recorded her discussion about Nick and how well she spent time with him. I gave this recording to the dean of the school where Judy and Nick worked, after which they were fired. I thought it was the least I could do. Judy was unemployed, and it calmed me down a little. 10 years later, I found out that Judy never remarried, as friends told me. She does not live alone but with 3 cats that she takes care of because she has neither a husband nor children. Her life turned into absolute loneliness. Story 2. Sometimes the desire for revenge blinds a person, and they can do the most horrible things. I agree that cheaters deserve to be punished, but not like in this story. Gentlemen, let's listen to this tale of revenge, and you can write your opinions in the comments. So, let's begin. I went to the counter and asked if there were any messages for me. The clerk checked the drawer for room 305, took out a piece of paper, and handed it to me. As I was reading the note, 2 men sitting in the hall got up and approached me. The message said that I should contact Detective Howard Miller, and the phone number was provided. 2 men came up to me, one on each side, and the one on my right asked if I was Frank Thomas. I confirmed it, and he showed me his badge before speaking. "I'm Detective Larson, and this is Detective Phillips. How can I help you? Do you have this note from Detective Miller of the Branson Police Department?" This is indeed from Detective Miller, although his jurisdiction is unknown to us. He contacted us after you didn't answer his call this morning. Could you tell us about your current location? We need some clarification on this issue. I started my day with breakfast in the hotel restaurant from 8 to 9 o'clock, chatting with several friends. After that, I spent the morning at a seminar in one of the hotel's conference rooms until noon. Lunch from noon to 1 o'clock was held in the company of several new acquaintances whom I made at the seminar. The afternoon session was held from 1 to 4:30 p.m., and then from 4:30 p.m. to 6 p.m., the cocktail lasted. Dinner was held in the hotel restaurant from 6 p.m. to 7:15 p.m. Then I spent the evening drinking in the Boom Room, where I was just a few minutes ago. It's been a busy day, and now it's time to relax. What's going on here? It would be wise to discuss this with Detective Miller. And one more thing, where were you from midnight to 4 yesterday? I was sleeping in bed. Do you have someone who can confirm this? Why do I need someone to confirm that I was asleep? You should contact Detective Miller for this information. I glanced at Larson and Phillips, then headed for the house phone. I asked the operator to connect me to my room and then dialed Detective Miller's number listed in the note. It looked like it was a cell phone because, despite the late hour, they answered on the third call. "Hello, Detective Miller?" "Yes, Mr. Thomas. It's hard to reach you. I've been in meetings all day, and I just got your message. 2 local policemen are with me at the moment, but they don't want to reveal the reason for my interrogation. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, Mr. Thomas. I'm sorry to inform you, but your wife has passed away." "What? How?" "She was fine when I talked to her last night." "When did you do this?" "About 6 o'clock. "Where did you call her from?" "From the hotel, between midnight and 4 o'clock in the morning." "She was killed?" "Yes, sir. It looks like someone broke into your house and took her life." "Oh my God. Any idea who might have done this? Was it a robbery? Were any valuables stolen, such as televisions or jewelry?" "I'm sorry, Mr. Thomas, but I can't discuss this over the phone. Let's discuss the details when you get home. I'll try to catch the first morning flight. May I speak to the officers next to you?" "Of course." I handed the phone to Larson and headed to my room to start packing. I needed to contact the airlines and leave messages for the seminar participants. During the return flight, all my thoughts were occupied with Melissa. We met at a cocktail party, and I immediately fell in love with her. She was a stunning redhead, her smile lit up the room, and her figure took my breath away. But she was with someone at the party, so I had to be discreet. When I was finally alone with her, I discreetly handed her a note with my contact details and a simple message: "Call me." To my surprise, she called the next day and asked why I thought she would get in touch on her own. I replied, "I didn't do anything. I didn't get anything." The British military unit is known for its motto, "Who dares wins," which is the best fit for this situation. How could I resist the opportunity to meet such a confident person? I couldn't. She shared her address with me, and I picked her up at 6 o'clock in the evening for dinner. She had everything: looks, wit, charm, and intelligence. On the third date, she surprised me by saying that we were going to have dinner at a restaurant, and all I needed to bring was wine. When dinner was over and the bottle of wine was empty, she took my hand and said, "We need to decide if we have a future together." She then took me to her bedroom, where she passionately made love to me. Despite her insatiability, I must have impressed her because the next morning she simply said, "You're coming." 9 months later, we got married. As I sat on the plane reflecting on our whirlwind romance, my thoughts were interrupted by the announcement of the preparations for boarding. I gave Miller the details of my flight, and he and his partner, Detective Paulson, were waiting for me at the airport. After meeting them, they asked me to go to the police station with them. I insisted on taking my car to the parking lot and either going after them or meeting them there. They preferred that I go with them directly. I reluctantly agreed but expressed a preference to pick up my car if I hadn't been arrested. I didn't see the point in going downtown with them and then coming back for the car twice. "Mr. Thomas, why are you refusing to cooperate?" "Given my circumstances, it's not surprising. Can we get down to business? My wife was murdered, and I am suspected despite being far away and having an alibi. The police are looking into my story. Yesterday, you refused to give any details about her death, promising only to discuss them in person. So, you expect me to leave my car here? This means that you don't think I'll need it anymore, which means you've already decided that I'm your suspect and expect me to be arrested by the end of the day. And you want me to cooperate? Cooperation goes both ways, Detective." After a moment of silence, he nodded slightly. "It looks like we're starting from the wrong side." Looking around, he gestured to one of the many food establishments in the terminal and spoke, "Let's sit down at a table, have a coffee, and I'll tell you what happened." When we sat down at the table, Miller began to explain, "Yesterday morning, around 9 or 10, your wife's friend, Mary Osborne, came to pick her up for a planned shopping trip. When no one answered the door, Mary tried the handle and found it open. She called your wife, but she didn't get an answer. Noticing that your wife's car was still in the garage, Mary went upstairs to check on her, but found her lifeless body on the bedroom floor. After contacting 911, the coroner determined that your wife had been dead for at least 4 hours before she was discovered by her friend. You mentioned that she was the victim of a murder because she was shot twice. It looks like you're hiding information from me, and you're right. In such cases, certain protocols must be followed, including an official interrogation at the police station, which will be documented. I've already told you more than I should have. Please pick up your car and join us at the station. Should I have a legal representative? This decision ultimately rests with you. You have the right to have a lawyer present. As a police officer, I must admit that I would prefer that you did not exercise this right. Lawyers tend to interrupt frequently, which disrupts the interrogation process. A calm interrogation can reveal valuable information to the interrogated person. So, am I going to be interrogated? Yes, you will be questioned. As you have already said, until you are cleared of suspicion, you are considered a person of interest in the investigation of your wife's death. After finishing my coffee, I took the shuttle to get my car. I was escorted to a room at the station where Miller and Paulson joined me. They informed me that our conversation was being recorded and offered to invite a lawyer, which I refused. They continued to ask about my whereabouts on the night in question, to which I repeated the same information I had provided to the detectives at the hotel. Paulson then asked if I had a handgun, to which I confirmed that I had several, mostly a Colt 45 and Glock 40, but there is no .22 caliber. I may have some 357 Magnums, but I'm not sure. How can you possess them and not be sure? Actually, they don't belong to me. They belong to my company. Your company, Paladin Security Services. Do you own Paladin? Yes, I do. He thought for a moment and then asked, do you know Robert Turner? I've never met him, but I know who he is. What do you know about him? Well, I don't really know, but as of last week, he was my wife's current lover. Are you aware? I guess it was around the beginning of April when she started dating him. Perhaps you should get a lawyer, Mr. Thomas. Why? Because you just admitted that you know about Robert Turner's affair with your wife, and Robert Turner was found dead in the bedroom with your wife, and you think that I, as an outraged husband, killed them both in a fit of jealousy? This is absurd. If I had killed someone in a fit of rage, it would have been Ronald Porter. He was the first person she cheated on me with. There were at least 4 more after Porter. I have never harmed any of them. Are you sure about this? I have private investigator reports on them. And you decided not to do anything? I could tell by the look on Paulson's face what he was thinking. It was saying, you are a weak excuse for a man. What kind of person are you? I swore silently and answered Miller, have you or your friends gone through a divorce? I'm not, but I know a few people who have been through it. And what did this man do in the end? Unfortunately, not very well. That's what bothered me. I have been successful in my own endeavors. My house is valued at just over $3 million, and the business to which I have devoted myself is estimated at $10 to $12 million. Living in a state where there is no accountability means that even if I catch Melissa cheating, she will still be entitled to half of our property. I will have to sell our house and business, split the proceeds with Melissa, pay court and legal costs, and most likely pay her alimony for a year. Despite such potential financial consequences, this can be seen as a motive, but it doesn't seem logical to me to resort to murder when I can just wait 9 months for the divorce to be finalized and get rid of her at no additional cost. She was supposed to receive a trust fund of about $7 million when she turns 30 in just 9 months. By that time, we would have had equal property, which would have allowed me to divorce her and leave everything. Unfortunately, her untimely death led to the fact that I lost this wealth. If she had waited until she was 30 to self-destruct, I would have inherited the money instead of it going to various charities. It seems like I would only benefit if I stayed with her for a few more months. By the way, you still haven't mentioned how she died. 2 bullets in the forehead. Turner suffered the same fate, a double hit to the head. Does that sound familiar? It should. Have you checked out Turner's wife? She has a solid alibi. No wonder. Have you checked her family? Her father is Vito Genovese, and if at least half of the rumors about him are true, he will not hesitate to help his daughter out of a difficult situation, family honor and all that nonsense. Isn't a double blow to the head a mafia hallmark? Miller and Paulson exchanged glances, clearly thinking the same thing. Miller turned to me and asked, "Can you confirm your theory?" "I have the private investigator's reports on her lovers, and I can tell you the name of her lawyer. You may be able to get information about the trust fund from him." The information about Genovese is in the private investigator report that I received on Turner. "Did your wife know that you were monitoring her activities?" "I doubt it. I played the role of an ignorant husband in front of her. She was incredible in bed and always wanted to please me. I could not imagine that I would remain without making love until she turned 30, and I did not want to cheat on her, risking that she would find out about it and divorce me. We have no further questions at the moment, but please keep us informed of your location in case we need to contact you again." When Melissa's coffin was lowered into the ground, I looked at the mourners gathered and wondered if anyone really knew what had happened. When I graduated from college at 20, I wasn't ready to settle down yet. I craved adventure and spontaneity before succumbing to a familiar life consisting of a 9-to-5 job, a stereotypical wife, and an ideal family with a fence. When I heard about the deployment of troops to Bosnia by President Clinton, I saw an opportunity for inspiration and enlisted in the army. Unfortunately, my military career turned out to be short-lived as I did not even complete basic training. In the third week, a group of my coworkers decided to teach me a lesson in the form of a violent blanket party. While I was unknowingly in the shower, covered with a blanket and pinned down by several guys, I had to be defenseless. When they started hitting me with socks filled with bars of soap, not knowing martial arts, I didn't know how to react. It was like a scene from a movie stuck in my head and guided my actions. Acting on instinct, I swiftly swung my foot from right to left, causing one of the attackers to lose his balance and fall to the floor. When his head came into contact with the floor of the shower, one of the others exclaimed in shock, "My God, he's bleeding." One of the men released his grip to examine the guy lying on the floor, which gave me the opportunity to free myself. With a quick movement of my foot, I knocked down another guy who fell to the floor. Suddenly, it turned out that there weren't enough men holding me down, so I shook off those who were there and got out from under the covers. 2 men were lying on the floor, and the third was bending over them. The 2 remaining men on their feet looked at me in surprise as I started to act. I grabbed one of them by the arm and threw him face first into the shower wall, causing him to collapse to the floor. The second man started to retreat, but I quickly hit the kneeling guy in the face, causing his nose to bleed. When he started to fall, I kicked him hard. Then I turned to the remaining standing man, who was running away in fear. The first person I knocked down didn't move, but the second one did, so I jumped on his back, grabbed his head, and pinned him to the ground. By this time, platoon sergeants had arrived at the scene. Sergeant Mark quickly identified the blanket and socks filled with soap and immediately understood the situation. When I tried to walk past him, he questioned my intentions, deciding to catch the culprit. He stated, "There is another troublemaker, and I intend to find him." I made another attempt to elude him, but he firmly stated, "No, Thomas, you're not going anywhere." He told me to step aside while he dealt with the situation. In the end, everything was settled, and I found myself imprisoned in a checkpoint. On the second day of my stay there, I was called to the room where the captain was sitting at the table. As I was being led from my cell to the room, a member of parliament informed me of the protocol: enter, stop 6 feet in front of the table, salute, and say, "Private Thomas reporting is ordered," and hold the salute until it is given. Following these instructions, I stopped in front of the table and announced, "I'm Private Thomas." The MP pointed out that I had forgotten to add "sir" in salute. I insisted that I had not forgotten about the greeting or the respectful treatment. Both actions show respect, but I don't respect those who mistreat me for defending myself. 4 people were injured because of you. The only thing that bothers me is that Sergeant Marks prevented me from making it 5 of them. What do you need to do to earn my respect? This meeting marked the beginning of my relationship with Lieutenant Captain Major Colonel Jones Smith, or whatever his real name was. It seemed that my fearlessness and aggressiveness had attracted the attention of a special unit of the U.S. Army. I was abruptly suspended from basic training and sent to a secret place where I received special training that few others received. I was taught how to handle firearms, knives, and other weapons, as well as skills such as picking locks, hot wiring cars, creating fake identities, and flying small planes and boats. After completing my training, I was released into the battlefield with the task of defending myself from both external and internal threats. But first of all, we focused on internal enemies. Our method of dealing with these threats has often been to eliminate them through various means such as accidental drownings, falls, and car accidents. This kind of work made me feel paranoid as I constantly wondered what would happen if the mission failed. The fear of becoming a scapegoat if the operation failed weighed heavily on me. Imagine a scenario in which a situation arose, and the most optimal solution would be your disappearance or the discovery of evidence along with your body. Given the dangerous tasks you were assigned, it was clear that if your elimination was required, it would be done without hesitation. During the 6 years I worked in the organization, I strategically stored money, weapons, and fake documents in different places in case of unforeseen circumstances. I have provided several escape routes. Fortunately, I've never had to use them, but I was sure they existed. After leaving the band, I moved into the security industry to start a new career. In short, my company provided various companies with the services of security specialists, also known as bodyguards and armed guards. After a year of work, I met Melissa at a cocktail party. We started dating and eventually got married. I believed that we had a strong marriage until one morning, a little over a year after the wedding, I woke up next to Melissa and felt that she was cheating on me. There were no special signs or evidence, just a sudden realization that something was wrong. I found out that Melissa was cheating and hired a private investigator. A week later, I had proof of her affair with a man named Ronald Porter. Now, I had to decide what to do next. Despite Melissa's loving and affectionate behavior at home, I knew I had to meet her face to face. The difficulty was to carry out this plan and not get caught. Melissa's infidelity was a mystery to me, but I didn't feel the need to reveal the truth. Over the next few years, I periodically followed Melissa, making my own plans. I found out that she had at least 4 other lovers, although there may have been others that I hadn't noticed during the time I wasn't following her. I decided to hold on to this information until the right moment. In the Army, I learned to fly out of necessity, not out of passion or interest. It was just a task that I had to do as part of my duties. After leaving the Army, I never thought that I would fly again, except as a passenger on a commercial airline. But using a fake name and the money I saved, I bought a Cessna 172, a Honda Accord, and a Harley. I also grabbed a .22 caliber target pistol with a silencer from one of my weapon caches and waited for the right moment to use it. Such a moment presented itself when I received a private investigator's report on Robert Turner and his test. I often received invitations to seminars and trade shows, so when I was asked to attend an industrial safety seminar, I agreed. After the program of the first day, I stayed for a drink and returned to my room. I called Melissa to inform her of my whereabouts and express my love and longing for her. The hotel I chose had few surveillance cameras in the halls and stairwells, which gave me a sense of privacy. Once in the room, I changed into comfortable clothes, ready for whatever was to happen next. I donned a baseball cap, pasted on a fake mustache, and put on glasses with transparent lenses. Then, I left the building through a side door. I walked a few blocks to get a taxi, which took me to a bar. From there, I walked 2 blocks to where I parked my Honda Accord. From there, I drove to the airfield where my Cessna was parked, filled out a flight plan for Athens, and took off. After completing the flight plan, in the middle of the flight, I headed back home. The flight lasted a little over 3 hours. After landing and securing the Cessna, I got on a Harley that I parked nearby and drove it to my house. After parking a couple of blocks from the house, I calmly entered it and headed to the office. Opening the bag I had hidden in the closet, I put on latex gloves and boots and then checked the charge of the taser. Everything was in place, and I crept up the stairs to the bedrooms. To my surprise, I found a bonus waiting for me. I expected to find only Melissa, but the sounds coming from the room indicated that she had guests. As I made my way down the hallway, I heard my wife urging her partner to move faster and faster. When I entered the bedroom, I immediately recognized the man who had been with my wife as her recent lover, which was another insult. Melissa's face turned pale when she saw me, and she let out a piercing scream. Turner turned to me, startled, and quickly pulled away from Melissa when I shot him with a taser. He collapsed on the floor, writhing in pain, and I hurried to Melissa, gagged her, and strapped her to the bed. Smiling at Melissa, I remarked, "How thoughtful of you to invite your lover. I assumed I'd find you alone." My mistake. I gently turned Turner over on his back and waited patiently for him to come to his senses. Meanwhile, I talked to Melissa, asking her about her evening. Did you like it, dear? Does Turner treat you better than Porter? Why did you leave Porter? Because Hathaway turned out to be a better match. But if you're always looking for something better, doesn't that mean Prince is better than Hathaway? Is Davidson better than Prince? I grinned, realizing my own position in the ranking. Melissa tore the sheets in tears as I continued to chat, and finally, Turner began to come to his senses. Grabbing a pistol with a silencer, I pointed it at Turner and said coldly, I hope she was worth it. Turning to Melissa, I asked her, I'll never understand why you betrayed me all these years with these, expletive. I won't take out the gag so you can explain. I can only hope that the happy memories you shared were worth the consequences you faced. I'm sorry, Melissa. I genuinely cared about you. With tears in my eyes, I pointed the gun at her. Her eyes widened in fear before I fired. A few hours later, I returned to my hotel room. The clock showed 5:15 a.m. After taking a short nap, I woke up and prepared for the day ahead. After having breakfast and taking part in the seminar, I watched the coffin being lowered into the ground and reflected on my actions. I was sure that I had taken care of everything. A study of my Army service record would show that I worked only in supply depots in the quartermasters, and there were no suspicious actions behind me. The fact that I didn't have an alibi could have served as a defense, since I would have been expected to cover my tracks if I had committed a crime. I decided to wait a few weeks before planning a business trip. While doing business, I used my fake ID to sell both the Cessna and the Accord. I deliberately left the Harley in a vulnerable place, knowing that it would most likely be stolen and would not be able to be connected with me. Walking up to Melissa's coffin and placing a single red rose on top, I reminded myself to remain calm and patient, knowing that all I had to do now was behave naturally and wait for the next move. The mysterious crime was never solved, and I continued my happy life without my cheating wife.